I will never forget the day my only son told me I was a disgrace to the family. It was my 68th birthday when Michael looked me in the eye and said, "You are a disappointment, Mom." I had just revealed to him that I had sold the house, the last tangible tie to my late husband, to pay off the debts my son was hiding from his wife. What I did not know was that my last sacrifice would also be my deepest liberation. But before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to the Grandma's Revenge Tales channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories reach. My name is Emily. I am 68 years old, and for decades I lived for my son Michael. My husband passed away when Michael was only 15, leaving me with the mission of raising our only child alone. I worked double shifts as a nurse, saved every penny possible, and postponed my own dreams so that Michael could study at the best schools. I never regretted the sacrifices. Every sleepless night, every meal I skipped, every year without a vacation, everything seemed worth it when I saw my son graduate in business with honors. The pride I felt that day was indescribable. I genuinely believed I had fulfilled my role as a mother. Life went on. Michael met Linda at a corporate event. She was stunning, ambitious, and came from an influential family. Their wedding was an elegant affair for which I saved for months to buy a suitable dress. I still remember the comment Linda made when she saw me. "How cute. You managed to find something very appropriate for the occasion." The condescending tone did not escape me, but I swallowed it, just as I swallowed so many other small humiliations over the years. The first signs of trouble emerged when Michael and Linda bought a house they clearly could not afford. 3 bedrooms, a pool, in an exclusive neighborhood. "It is an investment," Mom Michael explained with that confidence that always made me believe in him. "We will be fine." 6 months later, Michael showed up at the door of my small apartment with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a dejected face. He had lost his job 2 months ago. He had not told Linda because she was organizing a trip to Paris, and he did not want to ruin her happiness. "She does not know we are drowning in debt," he confessed with a trembling voice. "If we lose the house, she will leave me." The despair in his eyes broke my heart. It was in that moment that I made the decision that would change our lives. I offered to sell the only thing of value I still owned, the small house I had inherited from my husband. It was the last tangible piece of the life we had built together, full of memories, laughter, tears, and love. "No, Mom, I cannot accept it," Michael said, but the weak resistance in his voice revealed that he had already accepted it in his heart. "It is just a house." I replied with a smile that hid my pain. What matters are people, not things. The sale process was fast. The money, $200,000, was transferred directly to Michael's account, enough to pay off a significant part of his mortgage and give him some financial breathing room until he found a new job. During the following months, I noticed subtle changes in Michael and Linda's behavior. The visits, which were already rare, became almost non-existent. When I called them, conversations were short and rushed. The few times they invited me to dinner, Linda made sure to show off her new acquisitions, an Italian sofa set, paintings by emerging artists, state-of-the-art appliances. Robert's mother, my colleague from the club, just gave her son an imported car. Linda commented during one of those dinners, looking directly at me. Some mothers really know how to help their children maintain a certain standard. Michael simply lowered his eyes to his plate, avoiding my gaze. His silence hurt more than her words. Meanwhile, I had moved into a small rental apartment, carefully calculating every expense. My pension as a nurse was modest, and now without the rent I used to receive from the sold house, I needed to be even more careful with money, until my 68th birthday arrived. I waited all day for a call from Michael. At 7 in the evening, when I had already lost hope, my phone rang. It was him inviting me to a surprise dinner. "Linda prepared something special for you," he said with an enthusiasm that seemed forced to me. I put on my best clothes, a navy blue outfit I kept for special occasions, and took a taxi to their house. When I arrived, Michael greeted me with a quick and awkward hug. Linda appeared shortly after, impeccable, in a red dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "Happy birthday, Emily," she said with that cold smile that never reached her eyes. "I prepared grilled salmon. I hope you like it." The table was beautifully set with fine china that I knew was an heirloom from Linda's family. Crystal glasses reflected the soft light of aromatic candles. Everything was flawless, calculated perfect, and completely devoid of warmth. During dinner, we talked about superficial topics. The weather, the new gym Linda was going to, the neighbor's dog that barked too much, until Michael cleared his throat and exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "we have a special request to ask you." The look between Michael and Linda held something that froze me inside. It was a mixture of determination and shame, as if they were about to do something unpleasant but necessary. I felt my heart race as I poured more wine into my glass, seeking liquid courage to face what was coming. "We are thinking of opening our own business." Michael continued, his voice gaining confidence with every word. "A financial consulting firm. We already have some potential clients, but we need an initial investment. Just something around $50,000. Linda completed, looking directly at me, with that calculated smile I knew too well. "We believe you could help us, since you must have saved something from the sale of the house." The glass almost slipped from my fingers. The money from the sale had been transferred entirely to Michael. I did not keep a single penny. I looked at my son, waiting for him to clear up the misunderstanding, but he simply avoided my gaze, suddenly very interested in the pattern of his napkin. "Michael," I started carefully, "you know that all the money from the sale went to you, to pay off the debts on the house." A heavy silence fell over the table. Linda turned slowly toward Michael, her smile disappearing like ice under the sun. "What is she talking about?" she asked with a cutting voice. "What money from the sale? What debts?" In that moment, I realized my terrible mistake. Michael had never told Linda about the money, about losing his job, about the debts that almost made them lose the house, about my sacrifice. Michael had some difficulties a few months ago, I explained, trying to soften the blow. He lost his job, and you were behind on mortgage payments. I sold my house to help. Linda's face transformed into a mask of contained fury. Lost his job? When exactly did that happen? "About 8 months ago," I replied, realizing too late that I was only sinking Michael further. 8 months. Linda repeated slowly, as if savoring every bitter syllable. "And where's the $200,000 from the sale of the house, Michael?" My son finally looked up. His face was pale, a thin layer of sweat shining on his forehead. "I used it to pay the overdue installments, to pay off some credit cards, to finance my trip to Paris." Linda completed, her voice rising dangerously. "To buy that Swiss watch you said was a bonus from work? To renovate the kitchen you insisted we could afford?" Michael did not respond. There was no possible answer. Linda stood up abruptly, knocking over her glass. The red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "I am going to my room." "Do not follow me," she said before storming out like a hurricane, leaving only the echo of her high heels on the wooden floor. I was left alone with my son in the dining room, surrounded by the remains of what should have been a celebration of my birthday. Michael ran his hands over his face in a gesture that painfully reminded me of when he was a child and had done something wrong. "Why did you do that?" he finally asked, his voice low but loaded with accusation. "Why did you have to tell her?" The injustice of the question hit me like a slap. "I did not know it was a secret," I replied, feeling a growing anger. "You never said you were lying to your wife about the source of the money." "I was not lying," he protested weakly, "just omitting some details until I could fix everything." "And how did you plan to fix it? By asking me for more money? Money I do not have?" Michael stood up and began to pace the room like a caged animal. "I was going to make it work. The consulting firm is a real idea we have promised contacts. In a few months, we could be earning enough to what, Michael? To maintain a life based on lies? To keep pretending you can afford a lifestyle that is clearly beyond your means?" He stopped abruptly and faced me. His eyes, so similar to his father's, were hard and cold. "What do you know about means mom? You have always lived a mediocre life, settling for crumbs, never aspiring to anything better." His words hit me like poisoned arrows, precise and fatal. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a moment, I could not breathe. "Is that what you think of me?" I finally asked, my voice little more than a whisper. "That my life was mediocre? Look around you." He gestured widely. "This is the life we want. A beautiful house, international trips, social respect. I do not want to end up like you, counting coins to pay the rent on a tiny apartment." In that moment, something broke inside me. It was not just my heart. It was the image I had of my son, of the man I thought I had raised. I looked at him as if he were a stranger. "Do you think my life was mediocre because I never had a house like this?" I asked, feeling a sudden clarity. "Do you know what is mediocre, Michael? Lying to your wife, wasting your mother's sacrifice, valuing things instead of people." I stood up slowly, my legs steadier than I expected. "I am leaving now. My birthday gift to myself will be not listening to another word from you tonight." As I walked toward the door, I heard Linda coming down the stairs. She had changed out of the red dress into casual clothes and was carrying a small suitcase. "I am going to my sister's house," she announced, ignoring Michael completely and addressing me. "And as for you, Emily, you should have told me. Women like us need to look out for each other when dealing with men like him." Before I could respond, she walked out, slamming the door hard. Michael stood motionless like a statue of salt, looking at the empty space where his wife had been. "Do you see what you did?" he muttered, finally turning his gaze back to me. There was something despicable in his expression, something that made me recoil instinctively. "You are a disgrace to this family, a disappointment as a mother." The words floated in the air between us, impossible to take back. I felt a solitary tear roll down my face, but I did not allow myself to shed any more. Instead, I squared my shoulders and looked directly into the eyes of the man who was once my little boy. "The disgrace is yours, Michael, and the disappointment is mine." I walked out into the cold night without looking back, not knowing that this terrible moment would be the beginning of my deepest liberation. The taxi took me back to my small apartment where I entered, feeling the weight of my 68 years like never before. The city lights flickered through my window, indifferent to the emotional earthquake that had just shaken my world. I sat in the worn armchair I had rescued from our old home, one of the few pieces I brought with me, and finally let the tears flow freely. A disgrace, I repeated to myself, feeling every syllable like a small blade. Michael's words echoed in my mind, mixing with other cruel phrases he had said over the years, and which I had chosen to ignore. How could I be so blind? How did I not realize I was raising someone capable of such ingratitude? That night, I could not sleep. I went over every decision, every sacrifice, every moment I put Michael's needs above my own. I remembered when I turned down a promotion at the hospital because it would require occasional travel, leaving Michael alone for a few days. When I gave up a promising relationship with a widowed doctor because Michael, then a teenager, acted jealous and hostile. When I used my retirement savings to pay for the private university he insisted on attending. The morning found me exhausted with deep, dark circles, but strangely calm. Something had changed during that sleepless night. A silent resolution had formed inside me like a crystal, slowly solidifying in a saturated solution. While I was making my coffee, the phone rang. It was Sarah, my old friend from nursing school days. We had not spoken for almost a year, another relationship I had neglected in favor of always being available for Michael. "Emily, happy belated birthday," she exclaimed with that contagious energy I always admired. "I tried to call you yesterday, but it went to voicemail." "Thanks, Sarah," I replied, surprised at how hoarse my voice sounded after a night of crying. It was an unforgettable birthday. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah always had a sharp intuition for detecting when something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked simply. And then, like a dam finally breaking under pressure, I told her everything. About the sale of the house, about Michael's lies, about the cruel words exchanged the night before. Sarah listened in silence, occasionally murmuring words of support. "Do you know what is the strangest thing?" I concluded, feeling a deep tiredness. A part of me feels relieved, as if a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. "Because it was," Sarah replied firmly, "the weight of living for someone else, the weight of sacrificing your own happiness for someone who does not appreciate it." Her words were hard but true. I felt a lump in my throat. "What do I do now, Sarah? I am 68 years old. It is too late to what? I do not even know what I want anymore." "It is never too late to start living your own life," she replied with conviction. "And I have something to tell you that might be exactly what you need to hear right now." Sarah then shared some surprising news. She had received an invitation to participate in a volunteer nursing program in Italy in the Tuscany region. The program specifically sought retired nurses with experience in geriatric care, exactly my specialty during the last 15 years of my career. They offer accommodation, a small stipend, and most importantly, the opportunity to see a new country while doing something meaningful. She explained, barely containing her excitement. "I was going to invite you to come with me as a travel companion, but now I am inviting you because I think you really should sign up too." "Italy?" I repeated the idea, seeming simultaneously absurd and strangely tempting. "But I have never left the States. I do not even have a passport." "So what? It is never too late to get one," Sarah replied with a laugh. "The program starts in 3 months. More than enough time to organize everything." After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table looking out the window at the gray sky of that winter morning. Italy. The land of my paternal grandparents, whom I never met. The land my father told wonderful stories about when I was a child. A place that always existed in my imagination as a distant and impossible dream. While I contemplated this unexpected possibility, my phone vibrated with a message. It was Michael. "We need to talk. I am coming over." I felt my stomach tighten. A part of me wanted to refuse to say I was not ready to see him, but another part, perhaps the mother who would never completely cease to exist, wanted to believe that he would come with a sincere apology. I simply replied, "I will be here." An hour later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was Michael, more groomed than the night before, but with red and swollen eyes. Without saying a word, I motioned for him to come in. He sat on the sofa looking around as if noticing for the first time how small and modest the place where I lived was. I sat in the armchair opposite him, maintaining a physical distance that reflected the emotional abyss between us. Linda left, his voice began low. She said she needs time to think if she still wants to be married to me. I did not answer. There was nothing to say. Everything is falling apart. He continued running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. "And I do not know where to start fixing it. Maybe," I suggested gently, "you should start by being honest, with yourself and with others." Michael looked up, meeting my gaze for the first time. "It is more complicated than that, Mom. You do not understand the pressure I feel, the expectations." "What expectations, Michael? Yours? You have always settled for so little, always living as if you were afraid to ask life for more." His words hit me again, but this time, instead of pain, I felt a crystal clear clarity. I saw my son as he really was, a man trapped in a distorted view of success, incapable of finding satisfaction in what he had always chasing more. "Do you know what is ironic?" I commented, keeping my voice calm. "You see me as someone who settled for little, who was afraid to live fully, but the truth is that I consciously chose what was important to me. I chose to be a full-time mother after your father died. I chose to prioritize your education and well-being. They were never choices based on fear, Michael. They were choices based on love. He looked away uncomfortable with my words, and now I continued feeling a growing strength inside me. I am making a new choice, a choice for myself. I am going to Italy, I announced with a firmness that surprised us both. The words once spoken floated in the air between us like a declaration of independence. Michael looked at me as if I had just said, I plan to travel to Mars. His mouth opened and closed several times before he could formulate a response. Italy? What are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke? It is not a joke, I replied calmly, realizing I really meant it. The idea that seemed so absurd just an hour ago was now solidifying into a concrete decision. Sarah invited me to participate in a volunteer nursing program in Tuscany. I am going to accept. Michael stood up abruptly as if he needed physical action to process what he was hearing. You cannot just leave, he protested. You have never traveled alone. You have never been out of the country. You are 68 years old, for God's sake. Precisely because I am 68 is why I need to leave, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the emotional storm inside me. How many more years will I have? How much time do I have left to live new experiences, to see other places, to do something meaningful besides living for you? The last words came out more bitter than I intended, but they were true. Michael recoiled as if I had slapped him. So that is it? He asked, his voice rising. A fight, a few harsh words, and you decide to abandon your family? Abandon your own son? I felt a wave of indignation go through me. Abandon? Michael, you are 40 years old. You have your own house, your own life. I am not abandoning anyone. Finally, I am choosing to live my life. And what happened to family is forever. To mothers always put their children first? Were they just empty words? I took a deep breath, seeking patience. Family is forever, yes, and I will continue to be your mother wherever I am. But that does not mean I have to sacrifice my last years to be permanently available to you. Michael ran his hand over his face in a gesture that mixed frustration and disbelief. This is about last night, isn't it? About what I said when I was angry. I did not mean that you are not a disgrace or a disappointment. I was just upset. It is not just about last night, I replied, feeling a deep sadness. It is about every day of the last 20 years. It is about how our relationship became a one-way street, where I give and you take. It is about how I lost track of who I am beyond being your mother. I walked to the window looking out without really seeing anything. I barely remember the person I was before. The Emily who loved reading poetry at night. The Emily who dreamed of seeing the Mediterranean Sea. The Emily who wanted to learn to paint watercolors. Where did she get lost? I turned to face him, feeling a strange mixture of pain and liberation. She got lost in you, Michael, in taking care of you, in living for you, in sacrificing everything for you. And now I need to find her again before it is too late. Michael looked at me with an expression difficult to decipher, a mixture of shock, indignation, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding. And if I need you? He asked, finally his voice softer. What if you get sick there? If something happens to you? For a moment I thought I had detected genuine concern in his voice, but then I realized he was worried about himself. About who would take care of him if I was not available. I am sure you will survive, Michael, I replied dryly, just as I survived raising a son alone, burying a husband, working double shifts, selling my house to save yours. He lowered his eyes, finally silenced by the undeniable truth of my words. I am not doing this to punish you, I added more gently. I am doing this for me. Because if I do not do it now, I fear I will never have the courage again. In the following days, my decision only strengthened. I called Sarah and confirmed my interest in the program. She was radiant and helped me with the application forms, highlighting my experience in geriatric care. Michael did not reach out to me again that week. Linda, however, appeared unexpectedly at my door 3 days later. She looked different, less polished, more human. Without the perfect makeup and high heels, dressed only in jeans and a simple blouse, she reminded me more of the young woman Michael had introduced me to years ago. "Can I come in?" she asked shyly. So different from the confident and sometimes arrogant Linda I knew. I motioned for her to enter and offered her coffee, which she accepted with a whispered thanks. We sat at the kitchen table, an awkward silence floating between us. Michael told me, she said finally, about Italy. I nodded, expecting criticism or attempts to convince me to stay. Instead, she surprised me. "I think you should go," she declared, meeting my eyes for the first time. "I think you deserve it after everything." I was so surprised I could not formulate an immediate answer. Linda continued, the words coming out like a long-held confession. "I never gave you a real chance," she admitted, her fingers playing nervously with the handle of the cup. "From the beginning, I saw you as an obstacle, the overprotective mother who could not cut the umbilical cord." I swallowed hard, absorbing her words. They were not easy to hear, but I appreciated her brutal honesty. "The truth is, I was jealous," she continued, surprising me even more. "Jealous of the love Michael felt for you, of the security he had knowing you would always be there no matter what happened. My parents were never like that. They always made it clear that their love was conditional on my success, on my achievements." For the first time, I felt a pang of compassion for Linda. Behind the perfect facade was an insecure girl desperately seeking approval and unconditional love. And now I asked gently, "You and Michael?" She shrugged, a strangely vulnerable gesture. "I do not know. We are talking. He is different. More honest, perhaps. More willing to admit his mistakes. It is a start." When Linda left, I stayed thinking about our conversation. It was strange how life turned around. The woman I had considered cold and distant for years had just shown me a side of herself I never imagined existed. That brief moment of vulnerability created a connection between us that years of formal dinners and superficial conversations failed to establish. In the following days, I immersed myself in preparations for my trip. I had never had a passport, and the process seemed too complicated for a 68-year-old woman who rarely left her own city. But Sarah, with her characteristic energy, guided me through every step. Together we faced the bureaucracy, filled out forms, took official photos, in which, to my surprise, I did not look as old as I feared. And finally, 3 weeks later, I held in my hands that small blue booklet that represented my first true freedom. My application to the program was accepted with enthusiasm. Apparently, nurses with my experience in geriatrics were rare and valuable, especially those willing to work as volunteers. The program would cover my accommodation in a small apartment shared with Sarah, plus provide a modest monthly stipend for food and basic needs. It would not be luxurious, but it would be enough. With every concrete step I took toward Italy, I felt a mixture of terror and euphoria. Terror for the unknown, for the risk, for the enormity of the change. Euphoria for the possibility, for the adventure, for the opportunity to rediscover who I was beyond the roles I played for decades. Michael reached out to me again when there were only 2 weeks left until my departure. He showed up unannounced, carrying a cardboard box. "These are some things I thought you might want to take," he explained when I opened the door, his tone cautious, as if he were testing the ground between us. I accepted the box and invited him in. Inside, I found old photo albums, some simple jewelry that belonged to my mother, and letters my husband had written to me while we were dating. Objects I had left in the house I sold, which Michael apparently had kept all this time without telling me. "Thanks," I murmured, moved by the unexpected gesture. We sat on the small sofa. Another awkward silence settled between us. Michael looked different, thinner, with a stubble he would never allow in his days as an impeccable executive, wearing simple clothes instead of the expensive suits he used to wear even on informal occasions. "How are things?" I finally asked. "Different," he replied, running his hand through his slightly longer than usual hair. Linda came back home. We are talking a lot. About money mostly, about expectations, about how we built our life on foundations we could not sustain. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. I got a job, he said, a slight blush tinting his cheeks. It is nothing like what I had before. I am working as an assistant manager at an office supply store. The salary is less than half of what I earned, but it is honest. It is a start. I felt a wave of unexpected pride. It was the first job Michael had gotten on his own without using contacts or my financial help to support him while he looked for the ideal position. We are also selling the house, he continued, avoiding my gaze. It is too big, too expensive. We found a smaller apartment in a simpler neighborhood. Linda is adjusting to the idea. I could not help a small smile. The universe had a peculiar sense of humor. I had sold my house so they could keep theirs, and now they were leaving it anyway. I am proud of you, I said sincerely. Those are not easy decisions. Michael looked up, surprised. He clearly expected criticism, not approval. I came here to ask you not to go, he confessed after a moment. To tell you that I need you here, that it would be easier to start over with your support. But now, sitting here looking at you, I see something different in your eyes. Something I have not seen for a long time. What I asked, curious. Hope, he replied simply. You seem alive. The morning of my departure arrived with a clear blue sky, as if the universe were smiling at my decision. My few belongings were organized in 2 suitcases, a large one for the plane's hold and a small one to carry with me in the cabin. I revisited my apartment one last time, running my fingers over familiar surfaces, silently saying goodbye to that space that had been my refuge in recent years. Sarah would arrive in an hour to take me to the airport. We had separate flights, but would arrive in Florence with only a few hours difference. I would fly first, a deliberate decision I made to force myself to navigate alone at least part of that intimidating journey. I needed to prove to myself that I could do it, that I did not depend completely on anyone. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was too early to be Sarah. I opened the door and found Michael and Linda both looking as nervous as I felt. We came to take you to the airport. Michael said, his tone suggesting he would not accept a refusal. Linda stepped forward, handing me a small, delicate package. A farewell gift, she explained, for you to open when you are on the plane. I accepted the gift with a surprise thank you. We had never exchanged gifts before, not on birthdays or Christmases. It was always Michael who bought something on behalf of both, usually something practical and impersonal that clearly did not have Linda's touch. The drive to the airport was quiet, but not in an uncomfortable way. It was as if we had all reached a silent truce, a mutual acknowledgement that we were in unknown territory, trying to navigate a new type of relationship. At the departure terminal, after checking my luggage and with the boarding pass in hand, the moment of farewell arrived. I felt a lump in my throat. As determined as I was to follow my new path, there was a sharp pain in saying goodbye to my son. Despite everything, he was my only family. Michael hugged me first, a long, tight hug that took me by surprise. "Forgive me," he whispered in my ear. "For everything." I nodded against his shoulder, unable to speak. Linda approached after a few moments, her eyes also shining with suppressed tears. When Michael finally let me go, she also hugged me, a briefer, but equally sincere hug. "You look beautiful," she said, examining me with evident admiration. "Italy clearly suits you. I will call when I arrive," I promised, discreetly wiping a tear. "And I have the address of the apartment. You can visit me whenever you want." "Maybe next vacation," Michael suggested with a hesitation that suggested we were still on shaky ground, rebuilding bridges that had been severely damaged. I walked through the boarding gate without looking back, fearing that if I did, all my courage would vanish. Only when I was sitting on the plane, the seatbelt firmly adjusted around me, did I allow myself to open the small package Linda had given me. It was a journal bound in soft navy blue leather. On the first page, written in an elegant handwriting I recognized as Linda's, was a message. For you to record your adventures. For you to remember who you always were and who you are rediscovering. With gratitude for teaching me that it is never too late. Linda. The tears I had held back at the airport finally rolled freely. It was the first truly personal gift I had received from my daughter-in-law, and it came at the exact moment we were separating, perhaps forever. The flight to Florence was long and uncomfortable, as expected. I slept intermittently, waking up disoriented every time the plane faced turbulence. In the hours I remained awake, I alternated between absolute terror of what I was doing and an almost childlike excitement for the adventure unfolding. When we finally landed, my legs were shaking so much I feared I could not walk down the aisle of the plane. I followed the flow of passengers, letting myself be carried by the human current through immigration, where my brand new passport was stamped for the first time, and then to the baggage claim area. Following the meticulous instructions Sarah had given me, I found the tourist information counter where I asked for help buying a local SIM card for my phone. The young attendant, realizing my confusion, was exceptionally kind, explaining slowly how to use public transport to get to the small hotel, where I would spend the first night waiting for Sarah's arrival the next day. The taxi took me through streets that seemed plucked from a dream. Narrow, steep, paved with irregular stones, flanked by old buildings painted in pastel tones, faded by the sun and time. Florence was exactly like the photos I had obsessively studied in the previous weeks, but at the same time completely different. There was a smell in the air, a mixture of coffee, something earthy, and something indefinably ancient that no photo could capture. My small hotel was in a quiet alley, in a building the taxi driver informed me was over 300 years old. My room was tiny by American standards, but impeccably clean, with a window that opened onto an inner courtyard where laundry, hanging on lines, formed a colorful web between the buildings. I sat on the bed suddenly exhausted beyond words. I had made it. I was in Italy alone at 68 years old in a foreign country. The idea was so surreal that I started laughing a laugh that quickly turned into tears and then back into laughter. It was as if all the repressed emotions of the last few months were finally finding an escape valve. When the emotional storm passed, I took my new phone and called Michael as I had promised. It was dawn in the States, but he answered on the first ring as if he were waiting by the phone. I arrived, I said simply. I am fine. What is it like? He asked, his voice hoarse from sleep, but clearly interested. Old, I replied, smiling to myself. Beautiful. Different from anything I have ever seen. Tomorrow, I am going to explore a bit before Sarah arrives. After hanging up, I took a quick shower and fell into bed, sleeping instantly, dreamlessly, the sleep of the completely exhausted. I woke up disoriented, the unfamiliar room momentarily alarming, until the memory returned. I was in Florence. It was my first day in a foreign country. I dressed carefully, choosing comfortable clothes for walking but still presentable. The hotel receptionist, a middle-aged lady named Francesca, gave me a map and marked some nearby points of interest I could visit on foot. You will like the piazza, she said with a warm smile. It is beautiful. With the map firmly in my hand, I ventured into the streets. I walked slowly, stopping frequently to catch my breath on the steep slopes, but determined to absorb every detail. The terracotta tiles on the roofs, the small cafes with tables on the sidewalk, the laundry hanging between windows. I stopped at a small bakery where I shyly pointed at a cannoli on the counter. I sat at a small table outside, savoring the sweet treat and a strong espresso, watching the flow of people. Tourists like me, easily identifiable by their cameras and maps, and locals moving with the confidence of those who know every stone of those centuries-old streets. Tuscany welcomed me with an embrace of golden light. After 2 days in Florence, Sarah and I took a train to the countryside where representatives of the volunteer program were waiting for us. The train ride was a revelation. The Italian landscape unfolded before us like a moving painting. green fields giving way gradually to the golden hills dotted with twisted olive trees. Our home was a small apartment in a 3-story building, a 10-minute walk from the community center where we would work. The apartment was simple but cozy. 2 small bedrooms, a living room that also served as a dining area, and a compact kitchen. From the small balcony, we could see the rolling hills between the low buildings of the neighborhood. The program officially started the following Monday. Our role would be to offer basic health care and companionship to the elderly living alone in the local community. The community center served as a meeting point during the day, where the elderly came for meals, social activities, and preventive health consultations. On the first day, we were introduced to our supervisor, Dr. Anthony, a middle-aged local doctor who spoke English with a thick Italian accent that we sometimes had to ask him to repeat to understand. He introduced us to each of the staff and regular volunteers, and then took us on a guided tour of the facilities. We have about 50 seniors who come regularly, he explained as we walked. Some daily, others only once or twice a week. Most live alone. Their children emigrated to other European countries or moved to Rome in search of work. It is a growing problem in small Italian communities. That touched me deeply. Despite all the cultural and geographical differences, there was something universal in the experience of aging, in the loneliness that often accompanied that stage of life. That afternoon, I sat at one of the tables in the community dining room, helping an 82-year-old lady named Mrs. Ricci fill out some forms for her medications. Her English was broken, mixed with Italian expressions I had never heard, but somehow we managed to communicate, filling the gaps with gestures and smiles. "You are American, right?" she asked, her blue eyes faded by age, still shining with curiosity. "Yes," I confirmed. My grandparents were Italian, but they never told me how beautiful Italy was. She smiled, revealing well-cared-for teeth that I imagined were dentures. "And why did you come here to visit your grandparents' land?" I hesitated. How to explain to a stranger the complex web of events and decisions that led me there? How to summarize the sale of my house, my son's cruel words, my late decision to finally live for myself? "I came to find myself," I finally replied, surprised by my own honesty. Mrs. Ricci nodded as if my answer made perfect sense. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves," she said with the simple wisdom of the very old. I also found myself late in life. After my husband died, I thought my life was over. But then I discovered painting. She opened her worn purse and took out a small sketchbook. I flipped through it carefully and found delicate watercolors of local landscapes. The rolling hills, olive trees, whitewashed houses under the intense blue sky of Tuscany. "They are beautiful," I praised sincerely. I started painting at 70, she revealed with evident pride. I had never held a brush before. Now at 82, I sell some of my works at the local craft fair. It is not much money, but it is enough to buy more paints and paper and to give me a purpose. Her words resonated deeply in me. A purpose. Was that not what we were all looking for, regardless of age? Something that made us wake up in the morning with a sense of meaning, with the feeling that our existence mattered? In the following days and weeks, I settled into a comfortable routine. Sarah and I worked at the community center 5 mornings a week. In the afternoons, we had free time to explore the region rest or participate in social activities with the other volunteers and staff. I started taking long walks in the countryside, something I had rarely done in the States. There was something deeply therapeutic about walking on the earth, feeling the breeze through the vineyards, the sun warming my gray hair. I carried the journal Linda had given me, writing about my observations, thoughts, feelings. It was like reconnecting with a part of me that had been asleep for decades, the part that observed, that reflected, that marveled at the beauty around me. On a particularly sunny Saturday, about a month after our arrival, Sarah proposed that we take a small watercolor painting course offered by a local artist. I immediately remembered Mrs. Ricci's paintings and how that new hobby had transformed her last years. I always wanted to learn to paint, I confessed to Sarah as we walked to the artist's studio, an old converted barn near the village square. When I was young, I used to draw, but then life happened. Life happened. 3 simple words that held so many postponed dreams, so many paths not taken. My marriage, my husband's premature death, raising Michael alone, decades of hard work as a nurse, constant sacrifices. Somewhere along that path, the young woman who dreamed of paints and canvases had disappeared, replaced by the practical woman who had no time for such frivolities. The course lasted 3 hours, during which a bearded and kind artist named Giovanni taught us the basics of watercolor. How to wet the paper, how to mix colors, how to create different effects. My first attempt to paint the small basket of lemons he had set up as a model was disastrous. The colors bled into each other, creating an unrecognizable blob. "Do not worry," Giovanni laughed, noticing my frustration. Watercolor is about acceptance. Acceptance of accidents, of imperfections. It is like life. You can try to control it, but in the end it follows its own path. I was surprised by the philosophical depth of his words. I looked at my disastrous painting again, and instead of shame, I felt a strange satisfaction. It was horrible, yes, but it was mine. It was the result of my choices, my attempts, my mistakes, just like my life. On the way back to the apartment, we passed a small art supply store. Without hesitating, I went in and bought a basic set of watercolors brushes and a block of appropriate paper. It was not a small investment for someone living on a modest stipend, but I felt it was important, a commitment to myself, to the Emily who wanted to create, not just consume, beauty. That night, sitting on the small balcony of our apartment, I made my first independent attempt at painting. I chose as my subject the glimpse of the hills we could see between the buildings, a simple strip of green against the pink sunset sky. The result was even more disastrous than my attempt in class, but I did not care. There was something deeply satisfying in the process, in the absolute concentration it demanded, in the way it made me forget everything, except that present moment, that brush stroke, that color. When I finally put the brush aside, I noticed Sarah was watching me from the balcony door with a soft smile on her face. "You look happy," she commented. I reflected on her words for a moment. Happy was a simple word, but one that had become strangely complex for me. When was the last time I felt truly happy? Not just satisfied, not just fulfilling my duty, but genuinely happy as I felt in that moment with paint on my hands and a colorful mess in front of me? "I am," I replied, surprised by the simple truth of that statement. I am really happy. Time in Tuscany began to flow at a different rhythm, slower, softer, kinder. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before I knew it, we were already celebrating my 6th month in Italy. My Italian had improved significantly, now peppered with local expressions that made the elderly at the community center smile with approval. My skin, always fair, had acquired a golden tone from the long walks. My hair, which for years I kept in a severe bun, now fell in soft waves over my shoulders, the gray strands, shining in the sun like polished silver. But it was not just the external changes I noticed. There was an internal transformation happening, subtle, like the seasons changing until suddenly you realize you are in a completely different climate. I found myself laughing more easily, worrying less, sleeping better. The heavy layers of guilt, obligation, and self-criticism that had accumulated over decades began to dissolve in the Tuscan air. My watercolors were also improving. They were not masterpieces, certainly, but they had an honest quality that pleased me. Giovanni, the teacher from the initial course, became a friend and mentor, offering me advice and encouragement during our weekly classes, which I now attended regularly. "You have good eyes," he commented once, examining my painting of a twisted olive tree. "You see beyond the surface of things." His words moved me deeply, perhaps, because for most of my life I had focused only on the surface, on immediate needs, on practical responsibilities, ignoring the deeper currents flowing beneath my existence. It was Giovanni who suggested I participate in the small craft fair held on Sundays in the main piazza of the village. The idea of exposing my paintings to strangers terrified me, but at the same time, there was something irresistibly tempting about the proposal. "I am not ready," I protested, feeling the blush rise to my face. "No one is ever really ready," he replied with a typically Italian shrug, "but sometimes we need to pretend we are until one day we realize we are no longer pretending." The following Sunday, there I was with a small improvised table where I displayed half a dozen simply framed watercolors, landscapes of vineyards, olive trees, the cobblestone streets of the old town, a flowered courtyard glimpsed through a half-open gate. To my complete surprise, I sold 2 paintings in the first hour, one to a German couple on vacation and another to a local lady who said the view of the hills I had painted reminded her of her childhood. When I put the euros in my purse, I felt a wave of emotion so intense I needed to turn my face to hide the tears. It was not about the money, although it was welcome. It was about validation, about recognition, about the feeling that something I had created with my own hands was valuable to someone else. It was a completely different kind of connection from what I had experienced as a nurse, equally meaningful, but in a new and unexpected way. It was at that fair that I met Edward. He had a stall a few tables away from mine where he sold wood sculptures, small boats, birds, abstract figures polished until they shone like silk. I noticed him watching my stall several times during the morning, and when the fair began to quiet down around noon, he approached with 2 cups of coffee in his calloused hands. "To celebrate your first sales," he said, handing me one of the cups with a shy smile. Edward was around 75. I calculated, with thick white hair framing a face, tanned by the sun and marked by decades of smiles. His eyes were a deep brown, surprisingly young, in contrast to his wrinkled skin. I accepted the coffee with a thank you, and that is how our conversation began. Edward was a native of the region, a retired carpenter, who had started sculpting wood to pass the time when back problems forced him to retire. He was married for 43 years, until his wife passed away from cancer 5 years ago. He had 2 children and 5 grandchildren, all living in the Rome area. "They always ask me to move closer to them," he said with a sigh, "but how can I leave this land? It is part of me, like my own blood." I understood perfectly what he meant. In just 6 months, Tuscany had also entered my blood. The golden light, the slower pace, the kindness of the locals, the sense of belonging that had gradually grown in me. Edward and I started meeting regularly after that first Sunday, sometimes for coffee after the fair, other times for long walks in the vineyards at sunset. He showed me hidden places that only locals knew, small abandoned chapels, Roman ruins forgotten by tour guides, the best place to watch the sunset turn the hills into liquid gold. There was nothing explicitly romantic in our meetings, but there was a growing intimacy, a mutual comfort, an appreciation for each other's company that was in its own way a form of love. A mature, patient love without the pressures or expectations of youth, a love that needed no labels or definitions. On a starry night sitting on a bench in the piazza, Edward took my hand. He said nothing. He just intertwined his calloused fingers with mine. The gesture was so simple, so natural, that there was no startle, no hesitation. Just a silent acknowledgement of something we already knew. "Emily?" he said finally, his voice blending with the sound of the fountain. "Have you made plans for when your volunteer program ends?" The question took me by surprise. There were only 2 months left until the end of the 1-year program. Sarah had already decided to return to the States, anxious to see her grandchildren. I, however, had avoided thinking about the subject, fearing the decision I would have to make. "I do not know," I admitted, looking at our intertwined hands. "I have been thinking about it a lot lately." "Stay," Edward said simply. It was not a plea or a demand, just a suggestion, an open door. Tuscany needs more painters with good eyes. His proposal floated in the air between us, loaded with possibilities. Stay. A word so simple but representing a monumental choice. Abandon my previous life completely? Make this temporary place my permanent home? And what would that mean for my relationship with Michael, with my past, with everything I knew? I would need to think about it, I finally replied. There are complications. My son in the States. I understand, Edward said, squeezing my hand lightly. I am not asking for an answer now. I just wanted you to know that for me, Tuscany would be more beautiful with you in it. That night marked a subtle shift in our relationship. We started having dinner together regularly, often in the small stone cottage Edward had inherited from his father, just outside the village. He cooked simple and delicious dishes. Risotto with fresh mushrooms, roasted vegetables from his garden pasta with olive oil and garlic. I brought desserts and breads I was learning to make. On one of those nights, after a particularly pleasant dinner, Edward showed me something he had kept hidden until then. A small workshop he had built in the back of the house where he worked on his sculptures. In the center of the simple but well-organized space was a piece covered by a cloth. I have been working on this for weeks, he confessed, looking suddenly nervous. It is for you. When he pulled back the cloth, I was speechless. It was a wood sculpture of olive wood, a woman with wavy hair sitting on a rock looking at the horizon. It was not a perfectly realistic representation, but it captured something essential: the posture, the contemplative look, a dignified serenity that, with surprise, I recognized as mine. That is how I see you, Edward said softly. Strong like the olive tree, resistant to storms, but still flexible, still growing, even after so many years. I touched the sculpture with trembling fingers, feeling the smooth curves of the wood under my hands. It was a gift so intimate, so personal, not expensive jewelry or something material, but an expression of how Edward really saw me. My eyes filled with tears. No one has ever seen me like this before, I murmured. Then they were not really looking, he replied simply. That night, when Edward walked me home, we stood on the doorstep for a long moment. Then, with the naturalness of something inevitable, we kissed for the first time. A soft, unhurried kiss, loaded with the mutual knowledge that we had all the time in the world, but also that at our age every moment was precious. The next morning, as I walked to the community center, I felt strangely light, as if something I did not know I was carrying had been removed from my shoulders. I smiled at strangers on the street. I noticed the beauty of the wildflowers growing between the cracks of the sidewalks. I appreciated the impossible blue of the summer sky. At the center, I found Mrs. Ricci waiting for me, as she did every Tuesday for her weekly blood pressure check. Her sharp eyes examined me for a moment, and then she smiled a knowing smile that made me blush like a teenager. "Love suits you," she commented casually as I wrapped the cuff around her thin arm. "It makes your eyes shine." I did not deny it. What would be the point? At my age, I had learned that some feelings are too precious to be denied or hidden, especially when time seems increasingly valuable. That same day, I received an email from Michael. Although we spoke on the phone every 2 weeks or so, our conversations tended to be superficial. Updates on the weather, on his work, on my paintings. We rarely touched on deeper or painful topics. The email, however, was different. Longer, more reflective. Michael wrote about the therapy process he had started, about the painful discoveries he was facing about himself, about his behavioral patterns, about his relationship with me. I realized recently, he wrote, that I never really knew you, Mom. I only knew the version of you that existed in relation to me. And now, when I see your photos in Italy or those paintings you shared, or simply listen to your voice on the phone, I realize there is a whole person there that I ignored for most of my life. His words moved me deeply. There was a sincerity in them I rarely saw in Michael. A vulnerability that reminded me of the boy he had been before. Layers of protection and arrogance began to accumulate. "Linda and I are thinking of visiting Italy during the holidays in January," the email continued. "If you are open to it, we would love to see the place that made your voice sound so happy." I replied immediately with tears in my eyes, accepting their request to visit. After sending the email, I stared out the window of the small cafe where I had stopped to use the Wi-Fi, watching the people come and go in the piazza, thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. When I met Edward that night, I told him about Michael's email and the planned visit. "I am nervous," I confessed as we walked. "We have not seen each other in person since I left the States. So many things were left unsaid." Edward considered my words for a moment. "Do you know what I learned after so many years working with wood?" he asked finally. "That sometimes the knots in the wood make the sculpture more beautiful, more interesting. It is the imperfections that tell the story." I smiled at his wisdom. "You would have been a good philosopher." "Just a man who learned to respect the nature of things," he replied with a shrug. "Like wood, like the seasons, like children who grow up and follow their own paths." The new year arrived with cold winds sweeping through Tuscany, bringing a mild but persistent winter. The vineyard stood bare, and the village was quiet except for locals like Edward and me, who walked the cobblestone streets every morning indifferent to the weather. My volunteer program had officially ended, but the coordinator, impressed with my work, offered me the opportunity to stay for another 6 months. I accepted without hesitation. The idea of returning to the States, even temporarily, seemed increasingly distant. In the first week of January, I received an email from Michael confirming their arrival. He and Linda would stay for 10 days, staying at a small inn in the historic center, just a 15-minute walk from my apartment. The arrival date was in just 3 days. When I turned off the computer after replying, I felt a wave of anxiety hit me with unexpected force. It had been 8 months since our last goodbye at the airport. 8 months during which I had changed so much internally and externally that sometimes I barely recognized myself. How would Michael see me now? How would I see him? Edward, always sensitive to my mood swings, noticed my agitation when we met for dinner that night. "You are worried about the visit," he observed, as he poured me a glass of local red wine. I nodded, grateful for his perception that made explaining unnecessary. "I am afraid that when I see Michael, I will revert to who I was before. That woman who lived only to be his mother, who had no identity of her own." Edward considered my words while slicing fresh bread, the aroma of rosemary filling the cozy kitchen. "You cannot go back to who you were," he said finally with the quiet assurance I appreciated so much, "just as I cannot go back to being the young carpenter I once was. Time changes us, Emily. Experiences transform us. Your old skin has been shed like a snake that grows." His words were comforting, but the fear persisted. In the following days, I was taken by a nervous energy. I cleaned my small apartment until every surface shone. I bought enough food for a small army washed and ironed clothes I probably would not even wear. The morning of their arrival, I woke up before dawn, my heart beating fast like a trapped bird. I dressed carefully, choosing a light wool dress I had bought at the local market, and pulled my hair, now longer, into a loose bun. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who seemed simultaneously familiar and strange, more tanned, more relaxed, with laugh lines that spoke of frequent smiles instead of constant worries. Edward had offered to accompany me to the airport in Florence, but I decided this first meeting should be just between Michael, Linda, and me. Some bridges needed to be rebuilt in private before introducing them to the man who now occupied such a special place in my life. The Florence airport was relatively quiet that January morning. I positioned myself near the arrival's exit, my eyes fixed on the automatic doors, my hands restless, smoothing the fabric of my dress repeatedly. When I finally saw them, my heart skipped a beat. Michael looked different. Thinner, with a short, well-groomed beard he had never worn before, dressed in a more casual way than I had ever seen him in public. Linda was also transformed, her previously impeccable appearance replaced by a simple elegance that suited her much better. We stood for a moment just looking at each other across the distance. Then Michael dropped his suitcase and walked quickly toward me, wrapping me in a tight hug that took me completely by surprise. I felt his body shaking slightly against mine and realized he was crying. "Mom," he murmured against my hair. "Mom, forgive me." These simple words spoken with such raw emotion broke something inside me. I hugged him back with all the strength I could muster, my own tears now flowing freely. Linda approached after a few moments, her eyes also shining with suppressed tears. When Michael finally let me go, she also hugged me, a briefer but equally sincere hug. "You look beautiful," she said, examining me with evident admiration. "Italy clearly suits you." The drive to the inn where they would stay was filled with superficial conversations. About the flight, the weather in Italy compared to the States at this time of year, the plans for the next few days. We carefully avoided deeper and painful topics, as if we had established a tacit agreement that we needed to reconnect as people first, before confronting the past. After helping them settle in, I suggested a late lunch at a small trattoria that had become one of my favorites. The place was simple but charming, with wooden tables and checkered tablecloths, but the pasta was always fresh and delicious. During lunch, I watched Michael and Linda with curiosity. There was a new dynamic between them, more balance, less tension. Michael really listened when Linda spoke, instead of just waiting for his turn to speak, and Linda in turn showed a kindness toward him that I had never noticed before. After dessert, a tiramisu, they praised enthusiastically. Michael finally broached the subject floating between us. "Mom," he began, clearing his throat nervously. "I know we have a lot to talk about, difficult things I did and said that now shame me deeply. But before all that, I want you to know that I have never seen you so radiant. You seem like a completely different person." "Not different," I corrected gently. "Just more complete, as if parts of me that were asleep have finally awakened." Linda leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine with surprising intensity. "Emily, since you left, Michael and I have gone through transformations. Some easy, others painfully difficult. We sold the house, as you know. We moved to a small apartment. I went back to work, something I never thought I would do." "It is amazing," Michael intervened, looking at his wife with obvious pride. "She got a job at an art gallery. She's studying art history at the university at night." Linda's face lit up with a blush of pleasure. It was always my dream since I was a teenager, but my parents insisted on business administration, something practical, as they said. And then she married me and adopted my dreams instead of hers. Michael completed with evident regret. "Just like you did, Mom. It seems I have a talent for making the women in my life abandon their own dreams for what I want." There was a moment of silence as we absorbed the brutal honesty of his words. Then, to my own surprise, I started laughing. Not a bitter or ironic laugh, but genuinely amused. "Look at the three of us now," I said, gesturing to our small group. "A son who is finally learning he is not the center of the universe. A daughter-in-law who is rediscovering her dreams, and a mother who started painting at 68 and found many things she did not expect." Something in my words or tone made Michael look at me more closely. "There is something else, isn't there?" he asked, his eyes examining my face. "Something you are not telling us." I took a sip of water, considering how to answer. This was not the moment I had planned to talk about Edward, but I realized there was no reason to hide or postpone it. Yes, I admitted feeling warmth rise to my face. There is someone special, a man named Edward, a retired carpenter who sculpts wood. He has become important to me. Linda's eyes went wide, and then she smiled, a genuine warm smile she had rarely directed at me before. "That is wonderful, Emily. We want to meet him." Michael's reaction was more contained. He blinked several times as if processing the information, and then frowned slightly. "You barely know him," he said finally. "How can you be sure he is trustworthy?" It was exactly the kind of reaction I feared. The role reversal, the son becoming the protective father, questioning my decisions as if I were a reckless teenager. I took a deep breath, remembering Edward's words about feared storms that sometimes pass without causing harm. "I am 69 years old, Michael. I trust my judgment of people. Edward is a good, honest, and kind man. He makes me happy. That should be enough. The next 3 days passed in a kind of enchanted bubble, as if Michael, Linda, and I were together in an alternate version of our lives, free from the patterns and resentments that had defined us for so long. I showed them my favorite places in Tuscany, the hills, the small village cafes where I wrote in my journal every morning, the community center where I still worked 3 days a week. Linda was particularly enchanted by the craft fair where I sold my watercolors on Sundays. Michael, for his part, seemed fascinated by the simplicity and authenticity of local life, so different from the constant race for status and material possessions that had defined his previous existence. People here seem really happy, he observed, as we walked through the piazza after dinner on the 4th night of their visit, despite having so little compared to the standards I used to consider essential. They have enough, I replied, thinking about how my own definition of enough had changed drastically in recent months, and they have time to appreciate what they have. That makes all the difference. The next day, I would finally introduce them to Edward. We had agreed on lunch at his small cottage. I was nervous more than I wanted to admit. 2 worlds so different were about to collide, my past and my present, perhaps my future. Edward, noticing my anxiety when I arrived early to help with preparations, squeezed my hand gently. "They are part of you," he said simply, "so they are already important to me too." The simplicity and sincerity of his words dispelled some of my tension. I helped him prepare lunch, a traditional Tuscan stew, rich with the aroma of herbs, fresh tomatoes, and garlic accompanied by roasted potatoes and a simple salad from his garden. For dessert, I had brought an olive oil cake made with oranges, picked from the small community orchard where I sometimes worked on Saturdays. Michael and Linda arrived punctually, bringing a bottle of local Chianti they had carefully chosen after consulting the owner of the inn. Edward welcomed them at the door with the uncomplicated hospitality that was his trademark, leading them to the small terrace where the table had been set, simply but with care. The first few minutes were filled with the usual formalities of any first meeting. Compliments on the house, comments on the weather, polite questions about the trip. But gradually, as Edward poured the wine and we sat down to eat, the conversation began to flow more naturally. To my surprise, it was Michael who really broke the ice, asking Edward about his wood sculptures. Edward's face lit up, as it always did when he spoke of his art, and soon he was explaining enthusiastically about different woods. The tools he used, the process of finding the form that potentially existed in every piece of wood. It is like the sculpture is already there. He explained, his calloused hands gesturing expressively. My job is just to remove what is extra. Like life, in a way, Linda commented, surprising me with her insight. We remove what is not essential to reveal who we really are. Edward looked at her with renewed respect. Exactly. That is precisely how I see it. During lunch, I watched with growing relief as the conversation flowed easily between the 3. Edward told stories of his days as a carpenter, of the changes he had witnessed in the region over the decades. Michael talked about his new position as a store manager, about how he was learning to find satisfaction in honest work, even if less prestigious than his previous career. Linda shared her enthusiasm for art history, her eyes shining when she described the Renaissance paintings she was studying. At no point did Edward try to impress or show off. He was simply who he was, an honest, hard-working man, deeply connected to nature and his roots, but also surprisingly philosophical and insightful. I saw Michael watching him with growing respect, especially when Edward spoke about sustainability and traditional practices that respected the balance of the land. After dessert, Edward invited Michael to see his workshop in the back of the house, while Linda and I remained on the terrace, enjoying the soft January sun. "He is wonderful," Linda said as soon as the men walked away. "Genuine in a way we rarely find in our old social circle." "Yes," I agreed, feeling a wave of affection thinking about Edward. He has taught me a lot about authenticity, about being true to oneself without apology. Linda hesitated for a moment, playing with the rim of her wine glass. "Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded, curious. "You two? I mean, are you thinking of staying here permanently? With him?" The question floated in the air between us, loaded with implications. It was something Edward and I had discussed only vaguely in late-night conversations or while cooking dinner together. The possibility existed not as a concrete plan, but as an idea growing slowly, organically, like one of the olive trees we loved so much. "I am considering it," I admitted finally. "I found something here I never had before, a sense of belonging to myself before belonging to anyone else. And Edward? He accepts me exactly as I am without expectations or conditions." "You deserve it," Linda said with a sincerity that surprised me. "After everything you did for Michael, for us, you deserve a life that is truly yours." Her words moved me deeply, more than I expected. For years, I had seen Linda as an adversary, a cold and materialistic woman who did not consider me good enough for her world. Now, for the first time, I felt a genuine connection with her woman, human to human. "And you," I asked, "are you happy now, Linda? Really happy?" She considered the question seriously, looking at the hills visible beyond the small wall of the terrace. "I am learning to be," she replied, finally. "It is strange. When we had everything, the big house, expensive clothes trips, I was constantly anxious, constantly dissatisfied. Now, with our small apartment and modest jobs, I feel a peace I never experienced before. When Michael and Edward returned from the workshop, I noticed immediately that something had changed. There was a new ease between them, as if they had shared something meaningful in their short absence. Michael was carrying something wrapped in a soft cloth, which he handed to me with an enigmatic smile. "Edward wanted me to give you this," he explained. Carefully, I unwrapped the package and found a small wood sculpture, 3 stylized figures intertwined in an embrace, their forms flowing into each other like waves. It was abstract, but unmistakably represented a family. "He started making it the night he met you." Michael explained, his voice strangely emotional, "and he finished it just yesterday." I looked at Edward, who was watching my reaction with attentive eyes. "It is beautiful," I murmured, running my fingers over the polished surface of the wood. "As always, you saw something I did not know was there." "What was always there," he replied softly, "was love. Even when covered by wounds and misunderstandings, it never completely disappeared." That night, after Michael and Linda returned to their inn, Edward and I sat on the small balcony of his house, listening to the silence of the countryside. The small sculpture of the family rested on the table between us, lit by the soft light of an oil lamp. "What did you and Michael talk about in the workshop?" I asked, finally curious about the change I had noticed between them. Edward smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering light. He asked me if my intentions with you were serious, like a good protective son should. I could not help laughing at the irony of the situation. "And what did you answer?" "The truth," Edward said simply, "that with every passing day I fall more in love with you, that I respect your independence and your choices, that I would never ask you to sacrifice anything for me, but that I would be very happy if you chose to share your life with me for as long as you want." His words hit me like soft waves, each bringing a new layer of emotion. It was not a formal proposal, it was not pressure or expectation. It was just a truth offered openly without conditions or demands. "And what did Michael say?" I asked, my voice little more than a whisper. "He said he had never seen you so happy and alive as now, and that whoever was responsible for that had his eternal gratitude." Silent tears rolled down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of deep and overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected journey life had given me. At 69, when many would consider life winding down, I was discovering just the beginning of something new and wonderful. The rest of Michael and Linda's visit passed like a good dream. Days filled with long walks exploring small villages, quiet meals washed down with wine, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Edward joined us frequently, his calm presence complementing our newly discovered family dynamic. On one of those nights while we were dining at a restaurant built inside an old wine cellar, Michael finally broached the subject I knew was on his mind since meeting Edward. "Mom," he began, his voice soft but determined. "Linda and I have been talking. We want you to know that we understand if you decide to stay here permanently." I felt my heart race. Although I had considered that possibility many times in recent months, hearing Michael verbalize it made it suddenly more real, more concrete. "I have not made a final decision yet," I replied honestly. "But you are considering it." Linda said, not as a question, but as a statement. I nodded. "Yes, I am considering it. I found a peace here I never knew before." "And Edward?" I paused, looking for the right words. "Edward sees me in a way no one has ever seen me before." Michael covered my hand with his, a gesture so evocative of his father that I felt a lump in my chest. "He sees the amazing woman you always were, Mom. The woman whom I, in my selfishness, never allowed myself to see completely." Tears stung my eyes, but I did not let them fall. This moment was not about pain or regret, but about acceptance and possibilities. "If you decide to stay," Michael continued, "we want you to know you will always have a home with us in the States whenever you want to visit. And maybe we can come here once a year, perhaps in the summer vacation, when the grandchild we are expecting is big enough to travel." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. "Grandchild?" I repeated, looking from Michael to Linda, who was now smiling broadly, one hand resting protectively on her flat stomach. "We are expecting a baby." Linda confirmed, her eyes shining. "We just found out a week before coming. I am 10 weeks along." A wave of emotion went through me so intense that for a moment I could not breathe. A grandchild, a new beginning, a new life, a bond that would connect all generations of our small family. "A baby," I repeated finally, my voice breathless. "I am going to be a grandma." Michael squeezed my hand. "Yes, you will be. And we want you to be part of his or her life no matter where you choose to live." The news of Linda's pregnancy subtly altered the tone of the last days of their visit. Now there was a new element in our conversations. Plans for the future, discussions about names, speculations about what this new family member would be like. I began to see Michael and Linda with different eyes, not just as a couple trying to rebuild their relationship, but as future parents about to embark on the same transformative journey I had experienced decades ago. On the eve of their departure, as we walked through the village at sunset, Michael asked me something I did not expect. "Do you think I was a mistake?" He questioned suddenly, his voice so low it was almost lost in the evening breeze. "I mean, you had to sacrifice so much because of me. If you could go back, would you still choose to have me?" I stopped, turning to face him completely. "Michael," I said firmly, "never, not for a second, were you a mistake. The decisions I made after you were born, the sacrifices, the priorities I set, some were right, others wrong, but you and yourself were the best thing that ever happened to me." His eyes filled with tears. "Even after everything I did, how I treated you." "You are my son," I replied simply. "Not the perfect son, just as I was not the perfect mother. We are human, imperfect, learning as we go. But the love I feel for you was never in doubt. Not for a moment." He nodded discreetly, wiping his eyes. "That is how I want to be as a father, to love unconditionally but not at the cost of myself, to set healthy boundaries to teach my son or daughter to be independent. You will be a great father," I said with conviction, "because you are willing to learn from mistakes, yours and mine." The next morning, when I accompanied them to the airport for their departure, the goodbye was different from 8 months ago. There was no fear or uncertainty, only a sweet melancholy mixed with the promise of future reunions. I hugged Michael for a long time, then Linda, my hand resting briefly on her belly, still showing no signs of the life growing inside her. Keep us informed about every detail of the pregnancy, I asked. I want to know everything. We promise, Linda replied. And will you keep us informed about your plans? I understood the unasked question. They wanted to know if I had made my decision to stay in Italy permanently. I am going to think a lot in the coming months, I replied honestly, and whatever my decision, you will be the first to know. As I watched the plane take off, taking my son and daughter-in-law back to the States, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was a slight sadness, of course, but not the overwhelming pain I feared. Instead, a sense of wholeness prevailed, of cycles closing and opening simultaneously. Edward was waiting for me in the airport parking lot. His face lit up when he saw me approaching. I did not need to say anything. He simply opened his arms and I walked into them, finding the comfort that was now so familiar to me. "Did they leave okay?" he asked as he drove back to the small village we now called home. "Yes," I replied, watching the familiar landscape pass by the window. The rolling hills, the olive groves, the occasional glimpse of a stone farmhouse in the distance. It was a good visit, a good goodbye. "Not a final goodbye," Edward observed perceptively. "No," I agreed. "Just a see you soon. With a baby on the way, there will be many reunions in our future." In the following months, I established a new routine. 3 days a week, I worked at the community center now as an activity coordinator for the elderly. 2 days, I painted my technique, constantly improving under Giovanni's patient guidance. Weekends, I divided my time between the craft fair and long explorations with Edward. Small villages in the countryside, hidden chapels, ruins lost in time. My rental apartment began to feel increasingly like a permanent home. Small objects collected on my walks, interesting stones, pine cones, a piece of wood shaped like a heart decorated the shelves. My own paintings, now simply framed, adorned the walls. A small herb garden grew in pots on the balcony. Weekly calls with Michael and Linda became a cherished ritual. I watched through the computer screen as Linda's belly gradually grew her face, acquiring that characteristic pregnancy glow. Michael seemed calmer, more centered, as if the prospect of fatherhood had finally anchored something inside him that had always been adrift. It was during one of those video calls when Linda was in her 7th month that they gave me the news. "It is a girl," Michael announced, his face radiant with joy. "We are going to have a daughter, a granddaughter." The word resonated inside me like music. A little girl who would carry a bit of me in her genes, in her blood, in her story. We already chose the name Linda, continued exchanging a complicit look with Michael. We would like to name her Emily, my own name. They wanted to give their daughter my name. The emotion was so overwhelming I could not speak for several moments. "Only if you approve," of course, Michael added, interpreting my silence as hesitation. "It is perfect," I managed to say. Finally, tears rolling freely down my face. "It is the most beautiful gift you could give me." That night, sitting with Edward on his small balcony, watching the starry sky, I shared the news and my growing certainty about the future. "They are going to name the baby Emily," I told him, still marveling at the honor. "My granddaughter will carry my name." Edward smiled, intertwining his fingers with mine. "A beautiful name for what I am sure will be a beautiful girl like her grandmother." We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the night sounds and feeling the soft summer breeze. Then, taking a deep breath, I shared the decision that had been forming in my heart in recent weeks. "I want to stay here," I said simply, "in Italy with you. But I also want to visit the States regularly to see my granddaughter grow. I want to be present in her life, even if at a distance." Edward squeezed my hand, his dark eyes reflecting the stars. "We can make that work. Nowadays, there are so many ways to stay connected, and we can always travel together to the States a couple of times a year." Together, I repeated, savoring the word. "Does that mean you would be willing to meet my family in the States to meet my granddaughter?" "Emily," he said with the tenderness that always made my heart race. "I want to know all parts of you, your past, your present, and if you let me, your future." 3 months later, I was at the Florence airport again, but this time not for a goodbye. Edward and I were boarding a flight to the States where my granddaughter, little Emily, had just been born 2 weeks early. Small but perfect in every way. The trip was long and exhausting for our aging bodies, but the fatigue vanished instantly when we entered the hospital room and I saw Michael holding a small bundle in pink blankets. With trembling hands, I received my granddaughter for the first time, looking at her perfect little face, her curious eyes, her tiny fingers that instinctively grasped my finger when I offered it. "She is beautiful," I whispered, feeling her light and precious weight in my arms. Perfect. Edward was by my side, his eyes misty as he looked at the baby. "She has your eyes," he observed softly, "the same eyes that made me fall in love with you." During the 2 weeks we spent in the States, we established a new family dynamic. Edward was warmly welcomed by Michael and Linda, who seemed genuinely happy for us. Little Emily was passed from arm to arm, receiving the love of all the generations gathered around her. One afternoon, while Linda was resting and Michael had gone out to buy diapers, I was left alone with my granddaughter, rocking her gently in the rocking chair, in the room they had prepared for her. Edward had gone for a walk to give us this moment alone. "Do you know your grandma used to be afraid of living?" I whispered to her as her little eyes fought sleep. For a long time, I thought it was too late to start over. Too late for dreams, for love, for adventures. I kissed her soft forehead, inhaling that indescribable baby smell. But it is never too late, little Emily. That is the most important lesson I want you to learn from your grandma. It is never too late to discover who you really are. The day of our departure back to Italy, there were no tears of sadness, only promises of frequent reunions. We established a visit schedule. We would come to the States twice a year, and Michael, Linda, and little Emily would visit us in Tuscany during the summer vacation. "Grandma is going to teach you to paint when you are a little older," I promised my granddaughter as I held her one last time before leaving for the airport. "And Edward will show you how to find the most beautiful stones in the hills." On the plane, as we flew over the Atlantic toward our adopted home, Edward took my hand on the armrest. His eyes met mine, full of that quiet and secure love that had become my safe harbor. "Happy?" he asked simply. I looked out the plane window at the infinite ocean below us, thinking about all the paths that had brought me to this moment. The choices, the sacrifices, the mistakes, the late discoveries. I thought of the young Emily who dreamed of seeing the world, of the mother who postponed her dreams for her son, of the middle-aged woman who forgot who she was, and finally, of the older woman who found the courage to rediscover herself when everyone said it was too late. "Yes," I replied, squeezing his hand. Deeply happy. As the plane moved through the clouds, I realized I had completed a circle, not returning to the starting point, but arriving at a new place that somehow was exactly where I was supposed to be. At 70, I was not at the end of my story, but just starting a new chapter. A chapter full of love, art, beauty, and a granddaughter who would grow up knowing that her grandmother had the courage to follow her own path, even when everyone said it was too late. And it is never too late. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video appearing on the screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revenge like you have never seen before.